Okay.
This meeting
I hope you
is
remember
being
this.
recorded. Sir, actually our class has been started, so that's why.
Sorry, I didn't catch that here.
No, sir, I am saying that our online class has been started. That's why the network problem.
Okay. Okay. So I hope you remember this code.
Yes, sir.
Right. Have you revised the code which I shared in the last class with you? Did you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, if you're revising everything.
I am also, sir, trying to make a game with Pi game.
Alright, that's great. That's great. Okay. So, in the previous lecture, we were trying to make the enemy move in such a way that, if it moves a certain distance, so it should come back again itself, and it should travel, uh, you know, back and forth in the same direction. So that's what we were trying to do. And we defined this update method. So this update method will update the speed of enemy at regular interval of time. Right now, if I'll save the code and just run it, so I'm getting an error here, and this error says that local variable dx referenced before assignment. So I think I haven't defined dx anywhere, uh, you know, before this update function. So that is the reason I'm getting the error. So let's do one thing. Let's define dx over here. So I'm initializing it with 0. And here, let me just change enemy.x to enemy.x plus I would like to add the speed to this x value of enemy, and then let's just multiply it with time.dt. Okay, now if I'll save the changes and run the code, let's see what we will get. So again, we are getting an error here. Let me check why I'm getting the error. So local variable dx referenced before assignment. Why it is showing us the error like this? Everything here is fine. Mhm. If I'll just put it before this update function. So now if I'll run the code, it is showing me an error again. Let me just make it globally accessible then. Right. Okay, name speed is not defined. So now it is saying that speed have not been defined by us anywhere in the entire code. So let's do one thing. Let's just define speed also. So I'm initializing it with 1. Now if I will run the code, I'm getting enemy is not defined by. Why is it showing us this error now? Can you tell me, Tridish, why the error is coming? Enemy is not defined. Why it is saying, why it is telling us that we have not defined enemy anywhere?
Sir, because the enemy should be in capital, the E.
Enemy should be in capital. But dear, the issue is here, we have named it as enemy. The class name is enemy. And
Okay.
then, why we are getting this error? Why it is saying that we have not defined enemy anywhere? Just think about it. See, it's a class, right? Enemy is a class we have created. Now we are getting the error because we have not called this class anywhere in the entire code.
Yes, sir.
Now in Ursina, what is the method of calling a class? In what ways can we call a class? If we have to call a class, how can we do it? See, we have a class with name enemy, right? Just try to understand my
Yes.
point here. We have a class with name enemy, and we have not called it anywhere in this code. So calling means we need to create an object for this class. So just after the point where we are creating where we have called the Ursina function, we can put a code here, enemy is equals to, and let's call the enemy function. Okay. Now, can you tell me whether this enemy class is a parameterized class or a non-parameterized class? Okay, let me
Sir,
help
it is a
you.
parameter.
Absolutely right. And how many parameters do we have to, how many parameters do we have to pass to, for how many parameters do we have to pass the value for this enemy named class?
Sir, one.
Not one, dear, two, x and
Yes.
y. One for x and the other for y. See, inside this
Yes.
enemy function, in enemy class, we have a class called, we have a function called init. So init is a by default function. By default function, with by default function, I want to say that interpreter doesn't want us to call this function anywhere in the code. It will come on this line and it will execute it automatically itself. Means we need not to tell the interpreter to execute this function. Okay, so basically it's a part of this class. It's inside this class and interpreter will execute it automatically. Now, self here I have used because you can say it's mandatory to use self within it, right? And it's not a parameter, basically. It's used for defining the variables, right? Initializing these variables with some values. If you will not use self here, what will happen if you will try to use these parameters or use these variables outside this function? You won't be able to do it. But with self, we have made them globally accessible. Are you getting my point, Ridesh? So
Yes.
let me just make it more clear to you. Now, if suppose you define some other function inside this class, let's say def with your own name, def3 dash. Okay, and it's a non-parameterized function, let's say like this. And now here, if you try to, if you want to access this model named variable, so you can simply write here self.model. Okay, and here you can also import self. You can also put self here. All right. But if you will try to use, if you will try to access it only through model, you won't be able to do it. So basically, self makes the things which you define inside a function globally accessible. Right. Then there are two more things, x and y. So these are the parameters for this class. Now, when we are calling the class without parameters, without passing the values for these parameters, definitely when we will run the code, we will get the error. Let me just show it to you. See, we are getting an error, right? And the error says that missing two required positional arguments. It means that we need to pass the values for these two variables, right? These two parameters. See, it is not showing us
Yes.
three. It is telling us that we have missed passing two required positional arguments. It means that only x and y, interpreter has read only these two things as parameters. It hasn't, given the preference of parameter to self. Okay, just remember this thing. Now let's pass a value for x and also let's pass a value for y. So for x, I would like to pass, let's make it minus 2.5. Okay, and for y, I'm passing 2. So saving the changes, running the code. Again, I am getting an error. Enemy object has no attribute model. Enemy attribute has no. Why is it showing us this error now? Enemy attribute, it should not show us the error. Self.model, this is fine. Okay, maybe it is, it requires this super function. Let's do it. So if you are getting an error like this, you can simply use this super function. Let me just save the changes and run the code and let's see whether this time, yeah. So see, it's working now. But I am not able to move my player. It's not moving. Why is it so? Why it's not moving? So remember one thing, dear, if you get this type of error, just a second. Let me comment it out first. So while creating games, if you get errors like this, enemy object has no attribute model. You know, this model is present inside Ursina, but the interpreter is not able to recognize it. So the solution for this type of issue is you just have to define a super init function. Okay, and that's the code. That's the way you need to write it. Are you getting my point here? Is it fine? Have you understood this? Ridash, you're not audible here. You're on mute. Tridesh, you're on mute, dear, if you're speaking something.
Sir, can you hear now?
Yes,
Hello?
now you're audible, beta. Now you are audible.
Yes, sir.
So I hope you have understood the point here.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's move to the next part. Now, I'm not able to move the player. So let's just change it to minus 2.5, minus 1. Maybe now we'll be able to move the player. Yeah, it's now I'm able to move it. Let me see if we can jump or not. Yes, I'm able to jump over these walls. Are you able to see this enemy over here? Is it visible to you, dear? Hello, Tridash. Okay, I hope you are able to see the enemy. I think there is some issue with your mic. No problem. So let me just continue. I would like to see, I would like to create this type of enemy for all these levels, right? For this first level also, for the second level also, and here I'm able to see only one enemy. So I would like to see at least two enemies for each of the levels. How can we do that? So let's work on that now. This code is perfectly fine. Is there anything which I am missing? No, I am not missing anything. This is also perfectly fine. And what we can do, we can see, because we want to create duplicates of the enemy now. So for that, we'll have to, create an empty list in which we can store all the enemies. So for that, we can simply define here enemies named empty list like this. And then we have this position over here. So let me just change the position to 1, 1. Now what will happen with this 1, 1? Let me show you that also. Okay, nothing happened to the enemy's position. Why is it so? Enemy didn't change its position. No problem. Maybe later on I'll be able to show the changes to you. So enemies, and then once the enemy gets created, I would like to append it to the enemies named empty list. So that's the code for it. Append, and here I can write enemy, right? So the enemy, once it gets created, it will be appended to this enemies named list. Now the next thing that we can do is we can okay, enemies is this, enemy is this, and then enemies append. And let's just do one thing. Let's call this function enemy second time. Like this, we can do it, right? And let me just change it to minus 2.5, minus 1. Okay, or let's make it 2. Okay, and here I'm going to again use this code so as to append it to the enemies named list. Let me run the code and let's see what we'll get. So now we are getting 2 enemies, right? Earlier there was only 1 enemy, and now we are getting 2 enemies. So if you will just use this code twice with different position in it, definitely you will get 2 enemies at different position. Fine. Now the next thing that we can do is here we have defined the speed of the enemy, And let's define a for loop with which we can control both the enemies. So for enemy in enemies, right? Because both the enemies are now present in this enemies named empty list. Okay, we have appended both the enemies in the enemies named empty list. So we can loop through the elements of the empty list like this, and enemy dot x. Okay, let's do one thing. Let's just put this code inside this for loop. Now let's save the changes and run the code. And so now we are able to see both the enemies moving. Earlier only one enemy was moving, and now both the enemies have started moving. They are going from left to right and then right to left. Okay, so in that ways you can just keep a control on the movement of both the enemies. So for loop is also something which you need to understand. Now here, if suppose you do not want to use enemy, you want to use some other variable, let's say D. So will this code work now? It will work, but you will have to replace this enemy with D. Then only it will work. Otherwise, it won't work. Fine. Let me just show it to you. D dot X. And now if I will run the code, let's see what will happen. So see, the enemies are moving. It's not like if we have used enemy here, then here also in this for loop we have to use enemy. It's totally your call. If you want to use some other variable like this, you can definitely do that. So things like that you can do yourself so that you can get a better understanding of each and everything whatever you are learning in these classes. I hope you're getting my point, dear. Okay, so now it's time for us.
Yes.
Thank you very much for confirming that, dear. So here we are duplicating everything. So now inside this for loop, let's just define these two lines of code. I think that will be fine. Let me copy it and I'm going to paste it here. Tab enemy is equals to enemy, and I need to make the position of the enemy also dependent on this M. The way the positions of all these duplicates are dependent on M, in the same way the enemy's position should also be dependent on M. How we'll make it possible? So we can simply pass some random formula like this: 2 minus 1 plus it's a random formula. Okay, size, and then into M minus 1, right? And the for because I do not want the enemy to move along the y-axis, so that is the reason 0 for y-axis. Okay, and finally I'm appending the enemy to this enemies named empty list. Similarly, I can again copy these two lines of code, paste it here. It's time for me to just change the value to minus. Fine, so I've replaced plus with minus and rest everything is going to remain the same. Then let me just copy all these 4 lines and I'm going to put them here. And I would like to just replace it with minus 2.5. You know why I am doing minus 2 and minus 2.5? Because there are 3 levels, right? So I've already calculated the values, which can make the enemies appear on the first level and the third level. Fine, so minus 2.5 minus 1, I think plus size is going to do. And let's make it 2, right? Because I want it to move above the, what we call it, above the bar, right? It is right now moving inside the bar. The enemies are moving inside the bar. I would like them to move above the bar. Then enemy, and here let's just replace this whole thing with this value, and here I can just change it to minus. I think that will do. Let me just save the changes and run the code. How many enemies are right now visible to you, dear? 3, right? But all are there on the third level. They are visible to us on the third level. We are not able to see. Okay, there are 4 enemies actually. or there are three enemies. There are three enemies, some shadow kind of things are also visible to us. So basically, I think I need to make some changes in the position, then only we'll get the output. So let's do that quickly. Let me just check the position again. So here I've passed 2 minus 1 plus size minus 1. And if I'll just change it to 1 comma 1, let me just remove all these things from here. We just need enemies empty list. Okay, now there are two on the third level. There's nothing in this, there's no enemy in the first and the second level. So I think there is still some changes we need to make. Now, what are the changes? My 2 minus 1 plus size into minus 1, 1, enemy 2 minus 1. Ridesh, can you just check what can we do for, making the enemies appear on the first and second level also? Enemies are there on the third level.
For that, you have to change the coordinates.
I need to change what, dear?
Coordinates.
We need to change the coordinates. Okay. So let's do one thing, Tridesh. I'm giving it to you as a homework. You can just work on this part, right? And what you have to do, you have to make some changes in such a way that we can get two enemies on the first and second level also. Right now, we are getting two enemies on the third level, but there are no enemies visible to us on first and second level. So just do something with this code with the help of which we can get both the enemies on the first and third level also. First and second level also. Fine, understood, dear?
Yes, sir.
I hope you'll be able to do it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now let me just show you a magic. So, I haven't defined anything for the, for which can help us in checking the collision in between this player and this trap over here. Right, so let's do this. If suppose the enemy or the player collides with the trap, so I would like the player's color to change. So what we can do for this, we can simply use this method of distance. ABS is a function which is used for finding out the absolute value. What is absolute value? Suppose if the distance comes as -1, so the absolute value of -1 will be 1. So it returns always positive value. Even if the value is negative, it will always return towards the positive number. If the number is 2, suppose, so it will return us 2 only. It will not give us -2. Okay, so that's the benefit of using ABS. Are you getting my point here?
Yes, sir.
So here we can just we can find out the distance between the trap and the player. So this code will help us in finding out the distance. Now we can tell the interpreter that the moment the distance becomes less than equals to 1, please make the player color go red. Please turn it into red. So that's how we can do it. Else, if this is not the case, please keep the color of the player white only. Okay, let me just save the changes and run the code, and let's see what will we get. So right now the distance is greater than 1. That is the reason the player's color is white. See, the moment the distance decreases, player turns into red. I hope you are able to understand this concept here.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now what I want is, if the player, now after turning into red, if the player tries to jump over the wall, it should not, it should not be able to cross the wall. How can we make it possible? So now we'll have to again modify this if control statement so that we can make it possible. Now here we can write if absolute value of let's say distance and size of the player. Now, have I defined anything with which I can control the size of the player? Let me just check it. Size. Okay, I have defined something called size here, right? So let me do one thing. Let me just modify this if control statement. So here, let's first calculate the absolute value of this thing, distance minus size. Okay, so if the distance minus size, uh, percentile size, okay, that's the formula. If this becomes equal, smaller than equals to 1, or let's copy it. So, when you will create 3 or 4 games on your own, you will be also able to, create formulas like this. They are really, I'm telling you honestly, dear, it's very easy to, understand these formulas, create these formulas. The way I create my own formulas for each of my, projects, you can also create your own formulas. It's not like you have to use mine only. You can have your own formulas in your code. Okay. So if the distance minus size modulus is for division, right? If this is, let's say, greater than equal to size minus 1, okay. If this is the case, so if any of these condition is true, and and if absolute value of player dot x minus ground dot y, okay, is smaller than equals to 1, so we do not require this now. So what should happen? The player's color should change. Otherwise, the player's color should remain white only. So if I just save the changes and run the code, let's see what is going to happen. I'm getting an error here. Maybe I've made the things a bit complicated. Okay, so I haven't put the required colon here. That's the reason. So if I now, I'm still able to jump, right? Maybe there is some issue with the formula. So absolute distance minus size modulus size is more than equal to 1, or absolute distance is greater than equals to size minus 1. Player dot y. Okay, it should be player dot y, not player dot x, because we are comparing the y value with. Okay, now see, now it has again turned red, but I am able to jump over the wall. Okay, so maybe I'll have to, work on this formula a little bit more. But if you want, you can just try it out. What I want is, if the player is in red color, it should not be able to, jump over the wall the way it is able to do now. It's able to jump over the wall. Are you getting my point, Tridash?
Yes, sir.
What you can do, you can just define a code with which the wall size can increase, and the player fails to jump over the wall, something like that you can do. So these, if you will think about these things, definitely you will be able to define the code in a proper way. Now we do not have anything with which we can check the collision between the player and the enemy. So let's just define a code for that too. Here I can, simply put a code like this. Again, I'm going to use this absolute function abs player dot x, and then we can use, again, we are going to calculate the distance between the player and the enemy. So enemy dot x, if the distance between these two becomes smaller than 1 at any point of time, and besides that, absolute value of player dot y minus enemy dot y is smaller than 1, Okay, so I'm comparing the X values also, I'm comparing the Y values also, right? So if this thing happens at any point of time, I would like my player to rotate by 90 degree. Now what will happen when the player will rotate? That's what you will come to know when you will check the result. So if my player will collide with the enemy, okay, the enemies are inside the bar. Let me see if I can jump. No, not able to jump. So I'll have to make them appear somewhere over here, right? Then only we'll be able to make the player collide with the enemies. So how can we change the position of the enemies? Now that's what we'll have to check for. Let's just change it to 3 and 3, saving the changes, running the code. No, they are not moving upwards. Okay, if I'll just use 1 here, let me just change it to 4. Here also I'm putting 4. No, I can, sorry, we cannot pass 3 values as it is 2 parameters function. So how can we make them? Why it's not moving upwards? Let's make it -1 then. Okay. -1.4. How about this? Okay, now we are getting 3 enemies. Why are we not able to change the position of the enemies? Anything? Am I missing anything? Let me check. Enemy.y, player entity, self.x is equals to x, self.y is equals to y. This is also perfectly fine. Let me check the script I've added at the end. Yep, this is perfectly fine. We have target the player. And the camera is moving with the player, right? So this is also perfectly fine. Okay, this is fine. So this is the enemy's code. M-1. Here we have used size into M-1. Okay. Enemies dot append. Why are we not getting the output? 2 minus 1 plus size into M-1. Where is our player? So our player is at this point. I think we'll have to work on this code a little bit more, then only we'll be able to get the output. Minus size into -1. Let's make it +1 and see what will we get. No, still they are moving here. If I'll just change it to -1, let me just reduce it down to, okay, let's make it minus size. So, okay, let me just check the collision part first. So what I can do for this, just a second here, I'm getting a call on my number. Just give me a short moment. Really sorry, Tridish. No, it was an important call. So, when the player, let me just show the result to you. So when the player is colliding with the enemy, so what is happening? See, it will rotate by 90 degrees. Did you notice the changes here?
Yes, sir.
The player rotated by 90 degrees. But what is happening right now, even if the player is dead, the enemies are still moving. So how can we stop the enemies? Now let me just tell you the concept for this. What we can do, we can define a variable, a counter variable. Switch is equals to 1. Fine, let's say this is the variable, and here, what we can do, we can put everything, whatever is helping in moving the enemies, back and forth. We can put everything inside an if control statement. If switch is